In warfare, what happens when a perfect defensive strategy runs headlong into a terrifying, brand new technology? Well, that's what we're about to find out. We're going to dive deep into the story of the Battle for Iwo Jima and how just 8 modified tanks didn't just help win a battle, they shattered the very soul of an army and completely rewrote the rules of war forever. So, I want you to picture this. It's February 1945. Thousands of U.S. Marines are storming the black volcanic beaches of a tiny island called Iwo Jima. They're braced for a massacre, they're expecting to fight for every single inch of sand, but instead, they're met with this eerie, unnerving silence. The enemy is literally nowhere to be found. But this wasn't a retreat, no, it was a trap. The entire Japanese army had, for all intents and purposes, vanished into the island itself. And this raised a horrifyingly simple question. How do you possibly fight an enemy that you can't even find? The architect behind this invisible fortress was one man, Lieutenant General Kuribayashi. Now, Kuribayashi wasn't just some old guard general. He had studied every single American assault in the Pacific, and he came to a conclusion that was, frankly, revolutionary. He realized that fighting the Americans on the beaches was suicide. So his strategy? Flipped the script completely. He would let them land, and then turn the entire 8-square-mile island into a single interconnected death trap, bleeding the Marines to death from the inside out. And this quote right here, this is from his actual defense order. It reveals a complete 180 on Japanese military doctrine. For years, the symbol of the Japanese warrior spirit was the banzai charge, a glorious, full-frontal human wave attack. Kuribayashi ordered his men to abandon it. Just stop. Instead of dying in glorious charges, they would meticulously, patiently bleed the Americans dry from hidden positions. He was turning Iwo Jima into a meat grinder, and his soldiers were going to be safely behind the blades. I mean, the sheer scale of his vision is just staggering. We're not talking about a few foxholes here. We're talking about 21,000 men living inside 11 miles of hand-dug tunnels. To put that in perspective, that's almost the length of Manhattan, all underground. They endured these hellish 122-degree temperatures, breathing toxic sulfur fumes day in and day out. They carved 1,500 fortified caves and pillboxes out of solid rock. The volcano, Mount Suribachi, wasn't just a mountain. It was a 7-story underground citadel. This wasn't a defensive line. It was a subterranean nation built for one thing and one thing only, war. And here's the genius of it. This fortress was custom designed to counter every known American weapon and tactic. They knew about the man-portable flamethrowers, so they built their cave entrances in an L shape to stop the flames. They knew about satchel charges and explosives, so they relied on the island's thick volcanic rock and reinforced it with concrete. They literally had an answer for everything they thought the Marines could throw at them. They had created what they believed was a perfect, unsolvable defensive problem. So you have to ask, how do you solve a problem that's designed to be unsolvable? Well, the answer didn't come from some grand strategy session at the Pentagon. It was forged in the heat of earlier battles, really born from pure desperation. You see, in the Marshall Islands, Marine tanks had shelled these concrete bunkers for hours, and the bunkers just shrugged off the attacks. They knew they needed something new, something that could reach into the places that bullets and shells just couldn't. They needed fire. And the key to this new kind of fire was a recent invention that came out of a lab at Harvard University, of all places, napalm. This chemical cocktail was a game changer. It basically turned gasoline into a sticky, horrifying gel. Why does that matter? Well, it meant it could be shot incredible distances, and once it hit a surface, any surface, it clung to it, and it just kept burning. This was the chemical that was about to unlock a whole new dimension of warfare. And this was the delivery system, a modified M4A3 Sherman tank, which the Marines quickly nicknamed the Zippo. Now, just look at these specifications for a second. The Japanese defenses were designed for infantry flamethrowers that could reach, maybe 60 feet, and they only lasted for a few seconds. The Zippo, on the other hand, could project a solid stream of liquid fire over 120 meters. That's longer than a football field, and it could do it for nearly a minute and a half straight. For the Japanese soldiers hidden deep in that rock, this was a weapon that simply shouldn't exist. It was something straight out of a nightmare. But the real horror of this weapon wasn't just the flame itself. It was the physics of it. This wasn't just a momentary puff of fire. This was gallons and gallons of burning liquid that behaved just like water.
It flowed down tunnels, it poured around corners, and it seeped into every last crack and crevice. And as it burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, it instantly consumed all of the oxygen in an enclosed space. This meant that anyone the fire didn't immediately touch would be suffocated. It turned their unbreakable fortress into an inescapable furnace.
So on D-Day +2, with Marine casualties piling up against the hidden defenses of Mount Suribachi, the Zippos were finally let loose. And what happened next wasn't just another attack. It was the birth of a terrifying new form of combat. In fact, the Japanese soldiers facing it would soon give these tanks their own name, Hino-kuruma, which translates to the Chariots of Fire.
The Marine tank crews, they had to invent tactics on the fly. They quickly developed this brutally efficient system. They'd work in pairs. A standard Sherman would roll up and just blast away at the hillside with its main gun, suppressing the enemy and drawing their fire. This gave the Zippo the cover it needed to crawl into range. Then, for about 30 or 40 seconds, it would just drench a cave mouth or, even more devastatingly, a hidden ventilation shaft with liquid fire. And as the two tanks moved on to the next target, the crews said they could hear the ammunition inside the caves cooking off in a chain of secondary explosions behind them. Thanks to these intercepted Japanese radio messages, we can actually watch their command structure completely break down in real time. Look at the timeline. The first message at 8 in the morning is a pretty calm, professional request for countermeasures. Just 6 hours later, the tone changes. It's a panicked, all units order, make the flame tanks priority targets. Then, by the next morning, less than 22 hours after that first message, the unthinkable happens. Commanders authorize a retreat, telling their men to abandon the very positions that took months to build. The perfect fortress was cracking wide open. But you have to understand, this was so much more than just a tactical defeat. The Chariots of Fire were triggering a deep, profound psychological collapse. You see, the absolute core of Japanese military strength was the Bushido Code, this unshakable belief in their spiritual superiority and a warrior's sacred duty to die for the emperor. This new weapon wasn't just attacking their fortifications, it was attacking the very soul of their warrior culture. And the result is right here in this chart. It's stunning. In pretty much every major battle before this, Japanese surrenders were practically zero. It just didn't happen. To be captured alive was considered the ultimate dishonor. But on Iwo Jima, 216 soldiers surrendered. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a huge number, but it was a seismic shock. It was the first real crack in the Bushido Code. For the first time, a significant number of Japanese soldiers chose capture over a guaranteed, horrific death by fire. You know, the names they gave the weapon, that tells you the entire story. These aren't technical military terms. These are expressions of pure primal terror. Demon weapon, dragon's breath. Think about that. These were soldiers conditioned to face death bravely, but this was something else. This was seen as a supernatural force that just negated their courage and offered a kind of death that their warrior codes simply had no answer for. And it all comes to a head in this one final, haunting message from General Kuribayashi himself, intercepted just before he was killed. American technology has overcome Japanese spirit. In one sentence, the brilliant architect of Iwo Jima's defense admitted the unthinkable. He was saying that his army's spiritual strength, the very foundation of their nation's fighting creed, had been broken by a machine, by American industrial technology. So the impact of these 8 tanks created a legacy that really extends far beyond that one battle on that one island. They didn't just save thousands of American lives in 1945. They wrote a completely new chapter in the book of warfare, and it's a chapter whose lessons still echo in the conflicts of today. I mean, just consider the brutal arithmetic here. Clearing a single Japanese cave position the old way meant sending in squads of men, absolutely knowing that you were going to lose nearly a third of them for every position you took. A single flame tank, however, could do the work of an entire infantry battalion, neutralizing dozens of these positions with almost no risk to its crew. The math is just undeniable. These tanks saved a staggering number of American lives. And that wasn't just the view from the guys on the ground. This right here, this is the official assessment from the very top. Admiral Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the entire Pacific Fleet, stated it unequivocally. The flame tanks were the single most effective weapon of the battle. It's about as powerful a confirmation as you can get of their game-changing impact. And the story doesn't just stop in 1945. You can draw a direct technological line from those Zippos on Iwo Jima through the flame weapons used in the tunnels of Vietnam, all the way to the modern thermobaric weapons we see today. These so-called fuel-air bombs, they operate on the exact same horrifying principle, using fuel and oxygen to create a devastating overpressure and heat in enclosed spaces. The ghost of Iwo Jima is absolutely still on the modern battlefield.
And so we're left with this really unsettling truth. The Chariots of Fire on Iwo Jima proved that industrial might could create a weapon that bypasses traditional defenses and attacks the will to fight itself. It saved lives, yes, absolutely, on one side, while inflicting a uniquely terrifying death on the other. And it forces us to ask this really difficult question that's just as relevant today as it was then. When technology can neutralize courage and render fortifications obsolete, what does victory truly mean?